Alright, so welcome back to Dynasty Warriors Gundam 3. We're continuing on with just kind of doing missions as the difficulty level increases. So you can see here we're on this particular map. One of the interesting things about this map, of course, is the key transporter point. You know, there's a catapult point. Okay, so one of the variations of this map is where they like to put a catapult point in the middle that only attacks like the 3 fields that are on the bottom. In this case, there's a new type lab sitting in that spot, so that means that we're not going to have, strategically speaking, you know, we need to head there. We also need to head to the partner field. And right now it looks like we're fighting DOMs, and we're also dealing with bugs. Spoilers for whatever. I have actually seen Gundam F91 now, and yeah, that's currently a thing. We'll come back to Gundam F91 when we get there. Maybe. You know, at some point we'll talk about Gundam F91 in a little more detail. But last time we were talking about the Universal Century and how, you know, it has several issues that sort of pop up, and it lacks a cohesive continuity, which is weird because the Universal Century is the one set of Gundam shows that are all supposed to happen in the same universe, from the original, well, at this point I guess, from Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin and the flashbacks in Unicorn, all the way down to Victory Gundam, or if you want, all the way down to Turn A. You know, all those Gundam stories, you know, happen with the same, you know, the same technology, so that, you know, technology is constantly being improved in each Gundam generation. Goes on, but as I was trying to start to say in the last video, the Universal Century itself, you know, it's kind of pick and choose as far as what exactly the story of the Universal Century is. Which sets of stories match up best? I mean, we talked about the split of Mobile Suit Gundam into essentially 3 different versions of the story, and, you know, depending, and some of the side stories that come off of those, made for games and other media, usually attempt to kind of skirt around those things. And I've been playing through SD Gundam G Generation Genesis on my own, and so for the first time I've had access to a lot of these side stories that take place in the same time as, you know, the original Mobile Suit Gundam story. That I always had trouble. I mean, the earliest OVAs of Mobile Suit Gundam, so War in the Pocket, for instance. War in the Pocket brought in a mobile suit that was more sophisticated than the thing Amuro was using, and the Gundam, even though you could make an argument that it was not the most powerful suit in the 1-year war by the time of the end of the 1-year war, it's still, you know, it's still the flagship. It's still the thing, you know, the Gundam shows up and you kind of expect a good result to happen. And one of the problems the side stories have is that you can't. Every side story in some way chips away at the Gundam specialness. Like the message of Mobile Suit Gundam, the idea that Amuro Ray was necessary for the victory of the Federation, and that the Gundam was necessary for the victory of the Federation, and the big battles and the things that he fought in, particularly in the invasion of space at the end, were impossible if Amuro was not there. And what the Gundam side stories tell you is that that's not exactly true. War in the Pocket skirts this issue by basically setting at the very end of the war with a suit that never sees the light of day except in this small side battlefield on Side 6. And even the suits used by the Zeonic troops at the time, the camphor is basically a model kit that turns into a mobile suit. The whole point of the camphor is that you basically have something that carry a lot of weapons once, and that's it. It really can't do anything after that. So statistically, the Camphor's weapons array is impressive, but its structural integrity, defense, all that stuff, stinks. So that the Camphor is something that you can sort of fit in the same world with Doms and Zaku's and Gelgoogs, and you don't feel like you're being cheated. Like, why didn't Zeon just make Camphors all the time and use that suit? And you sort of understand why that is. Same with the Alex. As they were working on the Alex, they got disrupted. They were going to, they were trying to produce a suit better than the Gundam, and one that was quote-unquote honed to new type capabilities. But basically all that meant is that the engineers took the settings on the original Gundam and kind of like jacked them up as high as they could go, figuring that, well, the pilot could handle it. They didn't actually use anything new. They didn't create Saikamu technology or any of the various stuff that runs around some of the Gundam side stories, which again bring up their own issues, because if you go through all the Gundam side stories, you're going to meet the Pixie, the specialized land version of the RX-78 that was apparently available around the time of the Battle of Odessa. Right at the time when Amuro was, having a fit and going rogue, because he's a 16-year-old boy trying to fight a war, and being a far more important cog in that war than any youngster has a right to be. So the Pixie is one of the first problems of the Gundam becoming less special, because as far as ground warfare is concerned, the Pixie is probably, it shouldn't be, but it's probably the better ground combat suit. Now, the Pixie is neutered by the choice of weapons that it's given. Again, like the Camphor, it's something that's supposed to be less armored. There's supposed to be more problems. It looks like we're about to get blown up here. Running around the enemy base. You can see that the on this particular level, we're given a time limit to take or destroy the final boss, and the time limit is can be extended by taking all the enemy fields. So what I'm doing here is I'm attempting to take the enemy stronghold in order to force the boss to come out so I can defeat him in the next 2 minutes and 30 seconds. This is something I wouldn't have been able to do if this works, and I don't remember if it does. This is something I would not have been able to do in Reborn, because in Reborn, any enemy ace that kind of shows up in a field is also going to become a defender of that field and someone who has to be taken out in order for you to hold the field. So we got some looks like we have an ally here somewhere. But yeah, I mean, you introduce, and the Pixie wasn't the first. Obviously, the Gundam ground type was the first unit. Again, the 8th MS team established that they were late in the war, so that you could imagine that, you know, they had time to sort of produce these Gundam knockoffs, known as the RX-79 Ground Gundam. Okay, got a full-bore unicorn here. That's not good. You know, the RX-79 Gundam ground type, which, again, never portrayed as being as powerful as the original RX-78 Gundam. So you don't have to. So, you know, you don't have to. And kept in a limited place. I mean, there was. I don't know. I know that theoretically there are 20-odd RX-79 units running around. But again, we're at the end of the war. It's not a real Gundam in the sense that a lot of its parts and technology is shared with the GM ground type. So, you know, again, you're kind of okay there. You don't have the same. It's not exactly the same problem as the Pixie, because the Pixie's not shown to be any weaker than the Gundam, except that they just don't give it good enough stuff. Like, what the hell? Or sorry, what is a beam dagger? Why are we using that? Is that because the power pack on the Pixie is shrunk in order to, so you don't sacrifice speed on the ground? But so the timeline of when, because the Gundam doesn't become operational until the second half of the war, sometime. And yet, from the Gundam and its technology, the Federation is able to develop this series of other weapons. Now, granted, they have more resources to do this than Zeon does, but they're able to develop at a very rapid pace. If you look at all of the outside side story stuff, Gundam-like things, and more Gundams, even though their first, you know, theoretically only Gundam building unit on Side 7 got mostly wrecked, you know, with only the survival of the RX-78-2 and enough parts to make the RX-78-3, which was then utilized pretty much for, you know, everything, every development that came after. ultimately, the 1-year war will see 6 RX-78 Gundam types. So suits that should be on par with the Gundam. And again, that in and of itself is kind of a problem, because why aren't you using these things in the main battle? The RX-78-6 Mudrock, created to be a boss in Zeonic Front. So you feel like you've really defeated something. What the heck is it doing on Earth? Earth is not the important battlefield at that point. It's okay for a team of ground Gundams who have no space capabilities and can't contribute to things going on at Solomon or Abaoku. To be doing their thing. But the RX-78-6 should not have been on Earth. I don't care how important the reconquest of military facilities taken by Zeon was. It's not where the key battle was taking place, as noted by the fact that General Rebel was in space, not spending all of his time resecuring stuff on Earth. Now, because of the fact that the main battle is in space, a lot of the Gundam side stories take place, at least in part, on Earth. Because there's a lot of battles that have to be fought there, like the 8th MS team fighting in Southeast Asia. And it gives you settings that you can use. But, a lot of the stuff starts to get out of hand, and it kind of undermines your concept. So the Gundam 4 and Gundam 5 in one of the Gundam side stories, I'm not exactly sure what it's titled because I've only seen the SD Gundam G Generation Genesis version of it, where it's like just the space side story or something like that. The Gundam 4 and Gundam 5 are used like the Germans used pocket battleships during World War II, where they basically are raiding Zeon supply lines and destroying Zeon supply connections between the various Zeon bases. And my question is, why exactly are you doing that? That mission could have been fulfilled by a less ambitious crew. Where you need the Gundam 4 and Gundam 5 is in these final battles in the large defense locations in front of Side 3 and Zeon. You need these guys to be able to take on the Zeonic fleet at Solomon, Abaoku, and potentially the Moon. Okay, you don't need them fighting, commerce raiding, basically. You can do that with other suits that they had available at the time. The reason they're doing this is because you have to explain why they're there and not in these situations. But it doesn't make any sense for them to not be in those big fights. It also, kind of, again, we're going against the mystique of the Gundam. Amuro and one Gundam manage to win the war, so to speak. And Zeon has all the trouble in the world dealing with him and that one Gundam. The minute you start to suggest that, oh no, there are 6 of these things, 4 of which are operational, not including the Alex, Zeon's fate seems to be sealed much earlier. Now add all the Gundam ground types that are available to fight on Earth. Take care of, that thing. Add a couple pixies, because there's more than one pixie unit, most likely. There's a Gundam thing called Missing Link, which at some point I'm going to have to go into. But Missing Link causes a number of difficulties for the Gundam stories at the end of the One-Year War. Another story that, another thing that's sort of unclear, it's sort of understood in Mobile Suit Gundam that the GM unit is based off of, sort of downsizing the Gundam unit. The only issue is how quickly were they able to do that process? When did designs from the Gundam when did they make the decision that, oh no, we need to mass produce these things, so we're going to have to take some shortcuts to get a unit in the field? Because in the Gundam side story that involves Matt Healy and Ken Biederstadt, ground Gundams are a thing that are already out there, when that storyline commences. Ground gems. And you would think that the ground gem would be it does make sense for the ground gem to come first, and the fact that, development on Earth, at the time, Federation didn't have a lot of space forces or space influence, at least it was shown. So, the idea that the GM ground type would predate the GM is fine, but is the GM ground type? Is it coming based off of the Gundam's specifications? How quickly was that development process made? And that story puts a RX-79 ground Gundam in the battle at Odessa, such that there's essentially a second Gundam type unit in that fight. At the same time, the Pixie stuff, is happening kind of in the Gobi Desert. And so the rapid ability of the Federation to put Gundam-style units in the field just seems a little bit fast to me. And the level at which they're able to do it also doesn't necessarily make